It's like one side you can really see the folds more than the other side. It's not just the light. It's something else. It's a character consideration. Don't worry. In these 30 years, there have, of course, been changes with regard to the American poor. The total number of poor has decreased somewhat. And while I do not write as an expert on poverty, let me try very briefly to list some of the new factors. There has been one distinct improvement, and that is in the condition of the elderly. Partly because they have become a politically potent group that has learned how to organize and exert pressure on behalf of its needs, and partly because programs like Social Security and Medicare have helped a good deal. Poverty among the elderly has decreased significantly in the last 30 years. However, at the time of writing this, I would note the danger that is posed to the elderly by the increasing number of corporations and companies that are forfeiting on their promise to provide health insurance for retirees. There have been a number of negative developments. The rise of the single parent family has led to increased poverty among both adults and children. Indeed, one of the most terrible developments has been the large increase of poverty among children. Another factor in the increase of poverty has been the use of drugs among some of the poor, especially black youth. It is hard to say whether poverty leads to drug use or drug use to poverty. Probably the two combine to make a vicious circle. Still, another reason for the rise in poverty has been the decline in government assistance programs for the poor and unemployed. Perhaps the most important factor in the increase of poverty during the 1980s has been the steady decline in wage levels, so that we now have in America a group we call the working poor. People who do have jobs, who work hard, who try desperately to stay afloat as providers of families, sometimes men, sometimes women, but who earn such wretchedly low wages that they sink below the poverty line. Some of these developments Mike anticipated, others he could not have foreseen. Let me quote from two authoritative studies about recent American poverty. The Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, headed by Robert Greenstein, reports that in 1991, the number of poor Americans hit its highest level in more than 20 years, as 2.1 million more Americans fell into poverty. The increase in poverty was particularly sharp among children. Some 900,000 additional children became poor in 1991, as the child poverty rate rose from 20.6% in 1990 to 21.8% in 1991. Some 14.3 million were poor last year. Like the overall number of poor people, the number of poor children was greater than in any other year. A census report issued in May 1992 showed the proportion of full time, year round workers who are paid wages too low to lift a family of four out of poverty has grown sharply in recent years. In 1979, some 12.1% of full time year round workers were paid wages this low. In 1990, some 18% were. And the Economic Policy Institute, in a richly detailed study, The State of Working America by Larry Michel and Jared Bernstein, reports despite the growing economy between 1983 and 1989, poverty rates were high by historic standards. In fact, those in poverty in 1989 were significantly poorer than the poor in 1979. For example, 8% more poor persons had income at 50% of the poverty line in 1989 than in 1979. The poverty rates of blacks have been at least three times that of whites since 1979, reaching 32.7% in 1991. The Hispanic rate has climbed from 21.9% in 1973 to 28.7% in 1991. The reason poverty rates remained high despite the economic recovery has to do with wage decline and the failure of the safety net, i.e., the government system of taxes and transfers designed to ameliorate poverty. Over the 1980s, the already low wages of low income workers fell 15.9% for male and 6.9% for female workers in the bottom 20% of the earnings distribution. Enough of statistics. The fact is that poverty remains a major blight on the American scene. That it persists over the years only makes it worse, since many people sink more deeply into what has been called the culture of poverty, losing all hope and sometimes giving up the search for jobs. And the scandal is heightened when you remember that in the Reagan Bush years there was an orgy of financial speculation, often resulting in tremendous increases of wealth among the already wealthy, as well as an increasing polarization between the rich and all others in the American population. The scandal persists, and that makes The Other America a book as significant now as it was on the day of its publication. I only wish Mike were still here among us to cry out at the shame of a nation. You know, my genitals didn't hurt as long as I was simulating that I was someone fucking else, right?